Welcome to History Crossroads, where past meets present, and every story reveals a new path through time.
A young girl walks into a bar, her eyes scanning the room. She's only 16, but she's learned to play the part. A Nazi officer smirks, raising his glass in her direction. He sees an innocent Dutch girl, an easy conquest. He doesn't know she's leading him to his death. Tonight, Freddie Oversteegen will pull the trigger, and she will do it for her country. But how does a girl so young find herself in such a dangerous game? What would drive a teenager to risk her life, not once, but repeatedly, to sabotage the enemy? And what did it cost her in the end? This is not just a war story. It's the story of an ordinary girl forced into extraordinary circumstances. A girl who had to make impossible choices, who had to become a soldier without ever wearing a uniform. Freddie Oversteegen was more than a resistance fighter. She was part of a shadow war waged not on battlefields, but in alleyways, safe houses, and whispered conversations. She was part of a fight where deception was as vital as bullets, and where a single mistake could mean death. Her story is one of defiance, strategy, and sacrifice, revealing the depths of courage that ordinary people can summon in extraordinary times. As we delve deeper into her journey, we'll see how her experiences shaped her, and how she carried the burden of her choices for the rest of her life. The Nazis occupied the Netherlands with an iron grip. They patrolled the streets, enforcing curfews, rounding up suspected enemies, and spreading fear like an infection. Freddie's world, once full of childhood dreams, became a chessboard of life and death, where every move had to be calculated. When she first joined the resistance, she was just a girl delivering secret messages. But soon, she would become something much more dangerous. She would learn how to lie convincingly, to pull the trigger without hesitation, and to face death without flinching. She would learn how to use her youth as a weapon, how to be overlooked, underestimated, and ultimately feared. But this transformation didn't happen overnight. It began with a simple choice: to resist. And that choice would define the rest of her life. Freddie Oversteegen was born on September 6, 1925, in Haarlem, Netherlands. Raised in a modest home alongside her sister Truus, she was instilled with a sense of justice by their mother, a staunch socialist who sheltered Jewish refugees and resistance members. As the Nazis occupied the Netherlands in 1940, Freddie's childhood vanished. The streets were no longer safe, as curfews and disappearances became routine. The Oversteegen home transformed into a safe house, where Freddie and Truus assisted in smuggling messages and supplies to those resisting the occupation. At 14, she took her first steps into the underground resistance, distributing anti-Nazi pamphlets and painting over propaganda. The work was perilous. Capture meant execution. She learned to move unseen, memorize safe routes, and outmaneuver Nazi collaborators, who were often just as dangerous as the soldiers themselves. One evening, she and Truus narrowly escaped capture after a tip-off led Nazi officers to their meeting place. Hiding for hours in a cellar, the sisters remained silent, hearts pounding. It was a defining moment. Fear no longer held them back, but propelled them forward. By 16, Freddie's role had evolved. No longer just a courier, she was trained in sabotage and espionage. Her talents in deception and reconnaissance made her invaluable to the resistance. One day, a resistance leader approached her with a proposition: assassinations. Freddie hesitated. Delivering messages was one thing. Taking a life was another. But as she watched more innocent people vanish, she understood. To resist meant to fight. With a deep breath, she accepted her new reality. She was no longer just a messenger. She was a soldier in the shadows, and she would never turn back. By 16, Freddie Oversteegen joined the Dutch resistance with her sister, Truus. Their ability to blend in made them ideal for covert missions, delivering messages, moving weapons, and gathering intelligence. The dangers were immediate. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation at a checkpoint, and she would never return home. Freddie quickly adapted. She learned to outwit Nazi patrols, feigning innocence when questioned. Her transformation from a courier to a direct combatant came swiftly. Soon, she was trained in sabotage and assassination, learning to dismantle rail lines, disable vehicles, and use firearms with precision. The resistance drilled her in mental resilience, forcing her to rehearse pulling the trigger until hesitation was erased. Freddie and Truus took part in assassinations, sabotage, and espionage. They perfected the art of deception, flirting with Nazi officers, luring them into traps. Their missions carried immense risk, but they adapted, becoming ghosts within the occupation. The war turned them from ordinary girls into hardened fighters. They had started as couriers and saboteurs, but became something far more dangerous: assassins. Freddie never sought recognition, only justice. She had made her choice, and she was ready for whatever came next. Freddie and Truus worked alongside Hannie Schaft, another teenage resistance fighter. Together, they developed a method as simple as it was deadly: flirt with Nazi officers, lure them into isolated locations, ensure they never returned. Their targets were Dutch collaborators, men who betrayed their own people for Nazi favor. At first, their assignments were limited to intelligence gathering and sabotage, but soon they were given assassination orders. Freddie learned to use charm as a weapon, playing the role of an innocent Dutch girl in bars and cafes. One mission required her to eliminate a high-ranking collaborator who had condemned dozens to death. She gained his trust with ease, leading him to an alley where a resistance fighter waited. A shot rang out, and the man collapsed. There was no turning back. Despite their deadly missions, Freddie struggled with the weight of taking lives. She and Truus reassured each other, but doubts lingered. The line between resistance fighter and killer blurred. Freddie's youth was her advantage. She could slip through checkpoints and gather intelligence undetected. But the weight of her actions grew heavier with each mission. One night, after escaping Nazi patrol by pretending to be drunk, she and Truus realized how precarious survival was. Freddie, Truus, and Hannie were bound not just by their missions, but by the understanding that each day could be their last. They whispered their fears to one another in the dark, knowing that war would demand an ultimate price. Killing is never easy, not even in war. Years later, Freddie Oversteegen would reflect on the lives she had taken, not with pride, but with the heavy understanding that war demands sacrifices few can comprehend. Unlike the glorified depictions of resistance fighters in films, the reality was far more complex. Every mission left a mark, not just on history, but on her soul. Each time she pulled the trigger, she reminded herself that it was necessary. These men weren't just officers, they were executioners, traitors, architects of suffering. They had ordered the arrests of innocent families, condemned people to concentration camps, and upheld the Nazi regime. And yet, when their bodies hit the ground, she couldn't shake the feeling that something irreversible had happened. She had not just ended a life, she had changed herself. Freddie once admitted in an interview, "We did not feel it suited us. It never suits anybody, unless they are real criminals." Killing had never been easy, not even when justified. She and Truus often spoke in hushed voices after their missions, trying to reconcile their actions with their humanity. Sometimes they reassured each other that they were fighting for the right cause, that without them, more innocent lives would be lost. Other times they sat in silence, unable to put into words the conflict raging within them. One mission in particular haunted Freddie for years. A Dutch collaborator had been marked for execution. His betrayals had led to the capture and deaths of dozens of resistance fighters. Freddie was chosen to carry out the task. She followed him for days, memorizing his movements, waiting for the perfect moment. But when she finally confronted him in a secluded alley, something unexpected happened. He begged for his life. In that moment, he was no longer just the enemy, no longer a faceless traitor. He was a man, terrified, pleading, swearing that he had no choice in what he had done. For a split second, Freddie hesitated. Was he lying? Did he deserve mercy? Her heart pounded as she battled with herself. The weight of the gun in her hand felt heavier than ever before. Then she remembered the faces of those he had condemned, the families torn apart, the children taken away in the night, the friends she had lost. Her finger tightened on the trigger. A shot rang out. Afterward, She didn't feel relief, only emptiness. Even after the war ended, the memories stayed with her. The nightmares came often, faces of the fallen, echoes of the past. Freddie and Truus had fought for freedom, but they had also been changed by their fight. War does not leave its soldiers unscarred, even those who fight in the shadows. Decades later, Freddie would recall these moments, not with regret, but with the somber understanding that some choices are never easy. She had done what was necessary, but she never forgot the price of war, not just the lives lost, but the cost to her own soul. As the war dragged on, the dangers facing the Dutch resistance fighters only grew more severe. The Nazis, desperate to maintain control, intensified their hunt for saboteurs and assassins. Arrests, public executions, and mass deportations escalated as the Germans tightened their grip on the occupied Netherlands. The resistance fighters knew that every mission could be their last. By early 1945, the Allies were making steady progress across Europe, but the Netherlands remained under brutal Nazi control. Freddie, Truus, and their comrade, Hannie Schaft, continued their operations, fully aware that the risks were mounting with each passing day. Their network had already been compromised in places, and the Gestapo was actively hunting them. Every step required caution. Every decision carried the weight of life and death. Hannie Schaft, recognizable by her striking red hair and unwavering defiance, had become one of the most wanted members of the Dutch resistance. She was no longer just an assassin. She was a symbol of resistance, a figure the Nazis were determined to eliminate. Freddie and Truus urged her to dye her hair to avoid recognition, but for a long time, Hannie refused. Changing her appearance felt like surrender, and she was unwilling to let the enemy dictate any part of her identity. Then, in March 1945, mere weeks before the Netherlands' liberation, Hannie was captured. A routine checkpoint stop turned into a life-altering moment when Nazi officers recognized her. She was found carrying underground newspapers and a weapon, clear evidence of her resistance work. The Nazis took her into custody, and for days she was brutally interrogated. Freddie and Truus were devastated when they received the news. They knew what capture meant. The Nazis did not imprison resistance fighters. They executed them. On April 17, 1945, just weeks before the war in Europe ended, Hannie Schaft was taken to the dunes near Bloemendaal. Her hands were bound as she was forced to kneel before her executioners. A Nazi officer fired, but the bullet only grazed her. Hannie, defiant even in her final moments, looked up at them and said, "I shoot better than that." The next shot took her life. Freddie and Truus learned of Hannie's execution shortly after. The loss was unbearable. They had lost comrades before, but Hannie was different. She was family. The war had taken so much from them, but this loss cut the deepest. They had survived while their sister-in-arms had fallen. It was a painful reminder that even victory demanded sacrifices. When the Netherlands was liberated weeks later, there was no moment of celebration for Freddie. The war had ended, but the ghosts of those they had lost remained. The people they had fought alongside, the missions they had carried out, the impossible choices they had made. None of it could be undone. Freddie and Truus continued to speak of Hannie for years, ensuring that her story would never be forgotten. After the war, Hannie Schaft was honored as a national hero in the Netherlands. Schools, streets, and monuments were named after her. But for Freddie and Truus, she was more than a legend. She was the sister they had fought beside, the friend they had laughed with, and the comrade they had lost in the fight for freedom. Her name would never be forgotten, and neither would the price she paid. The war had ended, but for Freddie Oversteegen, the battle never truly stopped. The occupation was over, the Nazis defeated, yet the scars of war did not fade as quickly as the flags of liberation. The memories lingered, the faces of those she had killed, the whispers of fallen comrades, the weight of survival when so many had perished. In the months following the Netherlands' liberation, Freddie and Truus found themselves struggling to adjust. The war had shaped them, hardened them, and now, in peacetime, there were no more missions, no more orders, no clear path forward. They had been warriors in the shadows, but now they had to learn to live in the light. Freddie married and had children, choosing a quiet life away from the public eye. She rarely spoke about her time in the resistance, reluctant to relive the horrors she had endured. Like so many veterans, she carried her past with her silently, unable to explain to those who had not fought what it truly meant to take a life for a cause. The nights were often the hardest. Shadows of the past crept into her dreams, reminding her of the weight she had carried for so long. For years, the contributions of Freddie, Truus, and many other female resistance fighters went unrecognized. Their work had been essential, yet history often favored the stories of men. The quiet heroism of women in war was often overshadowed, their sacrifices overlooked. But Freddie never sought recognition. She had not fought for medals or titles, she had fought for freedom. Decades passed before the world truly acknowledged what she and her sister had done. In 2014, Freddie and Truus were finally honored by the Dutch government with the Mobilization War Cross, an official recognition of their bravery and sacrifices. By then, Truus had already passed away, leaving Freddie as one of the last living members of their resistance cell. Even in her old age, she remained sharp, outspoken, and unapologetic about the role she had played in the war. When asked about her actions, Freddie never sought praise. "I never liked killing," she admitted, "but it was necessary. We had no choice." Even with medals and recognition, she carried the weight of what she had done, understanding better than most that heroism often comes at a cost. The burden of war does not vanish with victory. Freddie Oversteegen passed away in 2018, just one day before her 93rd birthday. She left behind a legacy of courage, a story of defiance, and a reminder that resistance comes in many forms. Her life, like her war, was one of quiet but unyielding strength. She never asked to be a hero, but when the world called upon her to fight, she did not hesitate. Today, her name stands alongside those of the greatest resistance fighters in history. Though time moves on, the echoes of her bravery remain, inspiring new generations to stand against oppression, to resist injustice, and to fight for what is right. Freddie Oversteegen's story is one of defiance, sacrifice, and unwavering courage. From a teenage girl secretly carrying messages through Nazi-occupied streets to a fearless resistance fighter eliminating high-value targets, her journey was one of extraordinary transformation. She was not trained as a soldier, nor did she seek glory. She had no uniform, no rank, no formal recognition, only an unshakable belief that tyranny had to be stopped, no matter the cost. Her legacy extends far beyond the missions she completed or the enemies she eliminated. She stood as a symbol of quiet resistance, proving that bravery often comes in the form of difficult choices made in the shadows. While her name may not be as widely known as some wartime heroes, her actions helped shape the fight against oppression, and her courage remains an enduring inspiration for those who believe in standing up for what is right. Freddie's life is a reminder that history is not just written by generals and politicians, but by ordinary people who choose to act in extraordinary times. Alongside Truus and Hannie, she demonstrated that resistance takes many forms. Sometimes it is carrying a weapon, sometimes it is passing information, and sometimes it is simply refusing to surrender to fear. As time passes, the details of World War II fade into history books, but stories like Freddie's ensure that the sacrifices of those who fought against oppression are never forgotten. Her voice, though quiet in her later years, continues to echo through history, reminding us all of the power of conviction and the weight of freedom. Today, her legacy endures. Schools, streets, and monuments in the Netherlands honor the bravery of the women of the resistance. Documentaries and interviews have ensured that her story continues to reach new generations. Most importantly, the lessons she left behind of bravery, moral conviction, and the strength to resist oppression continue to inspire. The world may have changed, but the fight against tyranny is never truly over. Freddie Oversteegen's story lives on, not just in history, but in the hearts of all those who dare to resist injustice, who refuse to stand by in the face of cruelty, and who believe that even the smallest act of defiance can change the course of history. If her story inspired you, share it with others so that her bravery is never forgotten. Subscribe to History Crossroads for more incredible stories of courage, resilience, and the untold figures who shaped history. Together we can keep these stories alive and honor the past by learning from it.